Folks, this morning there was this big news on Nova Kakhovka in the Dnieper river in the oblast from Kherson Oblast, in a point that was already controlled by the Russians for the last half year, more or less. This was a dam with an electric power station, hydroelectric power station that now is danified, and I think that won't be more recovered because this is a huge. The consequences of this explosion are huge for a lot of other places southwards from the river, and that indeed perils 16,000 inhabitants, at least on the Ukrainian side. This is on the river. The right side is under the Ukrainian control, and the other side is on the Russian control. And what it for me is important to see here is also the media coverage of all this, because this is only starting the consequences of all this event. It will have major repercussions in the next days and weeks. Let's see what is really the aim of who did this. For me, it looks clearly that this again another operation by the Kiev regime, Zelensky, and especially from the British intelligence. It has all the signs of it. Actually, one should question himself, why are the Brits so much eager on the Ukrainian war? Remember that the previous Prime Minister Boris Johnson was 5 times in Kiev, and Rishi Sunak now has already flew to Kiev at least 2 or 3 times. I'm not sure. At least 2 times, I remember. And then he met again Zelensky again in the G7, again in London a couple of weeks ago. Why they are so much interested in Ukraine and in supporting them. So they are actually a part of this war. They have already gave the regime weapons, drones, missiles, now aviation as well, airplanes, and they are offering all the strategy behind these operations by the Kiev regime. We all know the history behind it from the last 2 centuries, 1/2 century ago in the Crimea War, and since then I question myself and I research the Black Sea Fleet on Sevastopol, the Russian fleet, since the times of the Tsar and then the Soviet Union, is strategic for the defense of Russia. And since then, I think the Brits and the Americans want to get rid of the Russian presence, because then there will be a weak point, so where they can hypothetically in the future destabilize the country, Russia, from this corridor to Volgograd, the ancient city of Stalingrad. It's a very well-known, important corridor for the defense of the Caucasus and all this otherwise very unstable region in Russia, if they don't have the fleet in Sevastopol in Crimea. The thing is that with this explosion of today, there is serious risks for Crimea. From this river, Crimea had received the fresh water that supplies the peninsula, that will sooner or later have major effects on the supply of water, fresh water in the peninsula. And let's see then the consequences of it. From the other part, also the Zaporizhia, the famous Zaporizhia power plant, atomic power plant, nuclear plant, needs water to refrigerate the six reactors. The six reactors are stand off. I mean, they are not working right now, but they still need water. As far as I could read, they say that is not a major problem right now because there is a lagoon, a smaller lake in the from which they receive this water that is not dependent on the river. But in a longer term, we don't know. Is still southwards from this location of the explosion. But the defenses of the last month that the Russians have established in this area, now they won't be more able to defend. And this is the so-called dividing the front, the Russian front in the middle from Kherson, the strategic point, to break down through Crimea. Because this is I think this is the goal of all the operation of this counter-offensive, so-called counter-offensive in the last couple of months they were talking. And that could only be done right now, because half a year ago we have already read about this dam that could be destroyed with the purposes from this side or the other side, the Russians, the Ukrainians, why they could do that. There's a lot of propaganda, a lot of information, a lot of misinformation, a lot of smoke. We have to only be more concentrated in the real facts and what can from it derives from it. So this was the second biggest dam in the Dnieper River. The Dnieper River is actually the natural border between the Ukrainian world and the Russian world. Well, the Ukrainian world is part of the Russian world, historically, okay? We are talking about 1,000 years of history. But what is the modern concept of Ukraine starts from the Dnieper westwards, okay? So that is the natural border between Russia and Ukraine, modernly, from the last century on. So this has a major significance because it is in a point that is in the south. Kherson right now is still divided, as we already talked about. And now the two parts blame each other. But look at the media coverage. The biggest newspaper, the tabloid here in Germany, the Bild, as at 9 o'clock, they said, look at I have it here. Let me look at what did they said. At 9 o'clock, they said, excuse me, just a second, to see how the media coverage of this war has been very important to understand and to manipulate the public opinion, especially in Europe, because Europe is paying a lot. The European citizens are paying a lot with their own pockets this war, and we are already very burned out with all these the problems that have already came across this. All these supports and these sanctions, and now we have no energy from Russia, so it's a big mess that we are already in because of this war. And look, at 9 o'clock, the Bild said, Russen sprengen riesigen Staumdamm in der Ukraine. Russians explode a gigantic dam in the Ukraine. At 10:30, a gigantic dam exploded in Ukraine. So they don't mention already nothing about Russians because they all, maybe they have already received information that they were not the Russians. Let's not do the ridiculous, because if we do this kind of, but they have already done at 9 o'clock. They said directly in the front page of the newspaper, Build Online, Russians explode the dam at 10:30, not at 1 o'clock in the afternoon. Nothing. It disappears. Now they mention here a fire in a pub, something here in the Berlin outskirts. Nothing mentioned. In the first 20 news in the homepage from the Bild, you go down, you scroll, you don't see one mention about that explosion by the Russians or everything. So, but they have already spread the word, spread the fear, and they appeal to the feelings and the emotional part of the masses. The masses say that Russians, explosion, gigantic, and it makes a lot of emotional outcome of it. And in the morning, at 9 o'clock in the morning, there was the president of the European Council, Charles Michel, and he said this is a crime against, this is a war crime, and we will immediately make responsible the Russians. This is the guy who is leading the European Council, and he has no evidence of nothing. Everything actually points in the other side, and he is already saying that the Russians are responsible, and he is talking on behalf of me and all the Europeans with a neighbor like Russia, when they are being the victims of, most likely to be a victim of this terrorist act by the Ukrainians, as I see it, and as it was like half year ago in the Nord Stream. This now that this will be for sure. They will have more information. It will pass on the media coverage. Will pass for a second, third place. To forget, they don't want to mention this more again. But the fact is that the river itself will drain in the next weeks, and so all the mass, the water mass, will drain and will be easier. There is no bridges on this area, and this was one of the reasons that the Ukrainians could not pass with the artillery to the Russian side to make this so-called counteroffensive. But right now, this will be possible in the next couple of weeks or so. And that is the point where I have here something on this. The flooding is forcing to the abandonment of the Russian defensive positions, as well as the destruction of the minefields along the river. Once the reservoir finishes draining, the river will be much smaller and easier to ford by the AFU. The destruction of the dam means Crimea loses its water access. The strategic benefits are obvious for Ukraine. Up to this point, Russia could economize in the Kherson sector, as the wide-ranging river with no bridges preclude any serious amphibious assault. And now this is changed the figure. Everything changes in the next couple of weeks. That will enable actually the so-called counteroffensive. And now the Russians will have to divert a lot of attention and resources to this area. That is the if they want to support this offensive, because the offensive will be done here with the Crimea in the eyes. This is the whole idea. By doing this terrorism, they have now created a realistic threat of such once the flood waters recede, which will divert Russian reserves to cover this sector instead of allowing them to be used against Ukrainian offensive further east. And this was taken from a channel. I don't remember the name of the channel in Telegram, but is very well explained why this could be done, and only could be done now in the end of in this season, end of the spring, beginning of summer. They had a couple of weeks, not more, 4, 5, 6 weeks to do this, and now they are doing, because this couldn't be done in the fall or in the winter. So this is the reason. This is the reason why Zelensky was in London, because Rishi Sunak was talking to Zelensky. I think so. I mean, I have no special information. From what I can see from the news, it's not normal that Rishi Sunak is so eager, so all the time with Zelensky. Why? Have you seen the Europeans, or especially the Brits, being so much interested in providing weapons and intelligence and support and training soldiers to the Palestinians, for example? They have already been also victims of an invasion, and nobody cared about them. So I think there's a couple of things here already explained that might open minds for what is going on. I think this is a turning, at least a change. I wouldn't say that would change the course of the war, but will demand from the Russians extra efforts now to control this region if they don't want to lose the control of Kherson. We cannot forget that they already had the city, the Kherson city, the part that now is under control of Kiev, and they have lost that. And this is the point where the Ukrainians, Kiev regime, wants to recover the Crimea. That is the point, and this is the link where I think Brits and Zelensky are very, very playing together. Well, let's see what happens the next days, and see you here soon.